we have a lot of the social media companies now turning into these kind of overprotective figures that take on the role of protector.
They're not trying to protect anybody. They're trying to protect themselves.
Well,
they're trying to protect themselves from for political power and for legal reasons, and because they're trying to protect their
profits.
Right.
But here's the thing: how much do those employees wearing the "Love Him, Protect Him" shirt? How much is their protection serving Truman, and how much of it is serving their own interests? I want to keep the show going. I find Truman to be an entertaining character. I love Truman the way I know him, and I don't want him to change. I don't want him to be tainted by the real world. So I want him to stay as the version of himself that I love. So I want to protect him from the growth that could change him from that which I love. So that's this idea of protection taken too far is absolutely a vice. And I think that's something that is a very prescient idea in our culture right now, is that, protection comes with its own risk. And that is the risk of overprotection. Because eventually you can't protect the figure anymore, or you protect them so much that they eventually become resentful of you. And that's the issue with like a kind of if you to play that out in a romantic relationship, where I love this person so much that I don't want them to ever leave me, so I'm going to manipulate them or whatever to keep them by my side because I love them. Well, how much of that is true love, and how much of that is really your own self-serving interests?
Well, you have to question. I will say that, when you make that comparison with social media companies today, that I don't even, if anyone actually believes that, let's rephrase it. How likely do you think it is a multi-billion dollar multinational corporation cares about your well-being? Just state it that way. Anytime you wonder if that's real, ask yourself, how much does a multinational, multi-billion dollar corporation care about your individual well-being? Maybe you think a lot. And if you do, good job. Great. That's great. But like that's just there are different motivations again. So, I mean, like, look, some people who are in control of those companies may have good intentions.
They might not be bad people per se, but they didn't get to that level of success by making sure that everyone else around them was always made safe and put first. That's business, and that's, that's waking up from the naivety of thinking that everybody else's goal is to keep you safe and that's the most important thing. It's like, well, you're not living in the real world.
I think we can tie this in with the film in the way that I think that people's motivations are never individual motivations. So Christoph does have the dual motivations of, I think, legitimately wanting to protect what is his son because he adopted him from birth. I think there is
he saw him grow up.
I think there's a real aspect to that. And I think he also has the motivation of wanting to make a bunch of money and running a very popular television show. So we can think of that in our world as social media companies have the motivation of wanting, or they're profit driven. There's no doubt about that. If you don't believe, if you think that's not true, then you need to to stop, because that is true. and then, but they also, these are corporations that are made up of individuals with feelings, thoughts, and not all of them are bad, and not all of them are negative, and not all of them are even completely driven by the bottom line. I bet, though ultimately I think it is. But they have, so they may want to protect people. They may want to do that. Here's the thing. The way I think people operate is when you have motivations converge. So you have motivations converge with the figure of Christoph. He wants to protect his business interests, his corporation. But hey, what's also nice about that is he really does genuinely want to help or protect Truman. And so what people do is they take this least selfish motivation as they converge, and that's what they tend to publicly use to explain to people why they're doing what they're doing. And I think they use it a lot of times to explain to themselves what, the reasons for what they're doing. Either way, I'm no psychologist. I leave that up to you. I'm just a humble
I agree.
wordsmith and word explorer. Explorer of words.
Very nice. That's a great title.
Yeah,
well, I agree. I mean,
word or not.
I think. Okay, that's
Is
now
that
you're
like an
now you're
astronaut?
pushing it. Yeah, it would be. It would be. Sounds a little rough, but
It does. I got to work on that.
yeah, that one needs some dusting up. So the thing about this, and this is an interesting thing. This is kind of, the problem with the idea of protection as love, solely protection as love. This is the thing. It's that the good parent allows for a little bit of risk, that the child can experience a little bit of risk. They allow for their child to possibly fall down. They allow their child to learn to swim, and even though it's scary and the child might go underwater for a moment, they allow their child to learn to ride a bike, even though they might fall from the bike and get hurt. They allow their child to learn to drive a car, even though that's extremely dangerous as well. These are all any type of growth requires a level of risk, and the larger the reward for that growth, the larger your benefit from it, the larger the risk. And so protection at all costs, that requires stamping out any risk, is essentially protection at the expense of any growth. And so I think the real problem is not even just that the social media companies have on their own taken on this role. It's not only on their own. In many ways, it has been asked of them, because we have this strange cultural development where, and I think this is you could go down deep with this. I think it's a deep misunderstanding of the roots of American government, which is the idea that I'm going to turn to my government and ask them to intervene to make things better for me in the way that I see as beneficial. And so this is, I think Twitter would be better if we took off anyone that has ever used a slur on Twitter, or if anyone that I think is saying things that are mean, or anyone that is espousing support for Trump, because maybe that could be something that could be used by some radical supporter to start another insurrection or something. And then you can go to the other side too. It's not only the left that does this. It's the idea that, we should take off anyone that talks about Stalin on Twitter, because that's talking about a dictator that caused deaths, or this idea. And so, you have both sides have this propensity to want to censor the other side as a solution, and both are appealing to this larger authority for protection, essentially. And it's a big mistake, because that's it requires the giving of power. If you are requesting protection, you pay for that protection by giving away power. And there's a great quote by Plato. Who would have thought Plato would be so entwined with the Truman Show? But Plato says, "This and no other is the root from which a tyrant springs. When he first appears, he is a protector." And that's probably one of the best concepts to keep in mind the more we look at these massive companies taking on this role of protector, that they're going to protect you from bad speech, and they're going to get rid of all the bad people, and this will make this a safer place for you to be. Well, what does it take for them to be able to do that? It takes the power of being able to censor. That's what we pay for that protection with. And so you decide whether that's the role that you want these massive companies that essentially have monopolies on some of the most advanced and democratic means of communication. I mean, there is no faster and more equally spread means of communication than social media right now. If you go outside and you see someone doing a serious crime, you can actually very quickly capture that. If there's some type of true political problem going on where you have type of leader in a small community taking over and becoming a tyrant and overreaching, you can document that and spread it quickly. You have the ability to be a citizen journalist now. And that's a great thing, but not if we couple it with the idea that this medium must be protected and monitored and made safe by the companies that own them, because now it becomes a different thing. Now it's no longer an equal and democratic tool for communication and dissemination of news.
Well, the other issue that's going to arise is assume that that's successful, that you essentially shelter people from harmful language, which I'm no proponent of harmful language. I'm simply saying that here's the problem. Let's say that 10 years from now or whatever, that's successful, that you've essentially cleansed social media of anything, and assume that it would even be possible to do this, because you couldn't, because the target would always be constantly moving
that's
about
the
what
problem.
needs to be cleansed. But
it never ends.
But assume that. But even just for fun, assume that could be done.
Sure.
Well, now what you've done is created a sea haven online, so that then when human beings, which assuming once the pandemic ends and we all, and some of us decide to actually go back outside again and to interact with other human beings face to face, here's the problem. You're going to be jolted a great deal more potentially by the uncensored language now of the real world. But here's something I just realized. What might happen is people get so conditioned online that it changes the way people speak in person.
I think that's already happening.
Well, that does happen, but I mean, I'm thinking of it a little farther in the future, to the point where,
well, yeah,
I don't see any. We don't need Sea Haven, but we also need to not live in a dystopian world. We need to do our best to make the world outside of Sea Haven not. We need to do our best to make a world in which we don't want to escape into Sea Haven, and where I don't have to argue that a fictional character may be better off life in prison inside a dome, because I have some sense of what the real outside world is. Even though, to be fair, looking at my beard, you may say this guy probably hasn't been out.
Sense of the outside world.
He has very little sense of the outside world.
So